The Xylos research station hung in the silent void like a silver lotus, its petals unfurled in geometric harmony. To the casual observer, it represented the pinnacle of interspecies cooperation, a monument to what could be achieved when the various sentient races set aside their differences and worked toward common goals. But to Dr. Eris Thorne, the only human senior researcher aboard, the station was more like a beautiful cage where he was constantly under surveillance. Eris walked through the curved corridor leading to the central laboratory, nodding politely to the Viridian technicians who briskly stepped aside as he passed. Their tall, slender forms towered over his human frame, their iridescent skin shifting subtly in color, a biological response that Eris had learned to read over the years. The slight purple tinge that rippled across their features when he approached was impossible to miss. Discomfort, caution, the instinctive wariness of prey in the presence of a predator. 5 years on Xylos, and still they looked at him like he might suddenly pounce. Dr. Thorne, a melodic voice called from behind. You're proceeding to the laboratory earlier than scheduled. Eris turned to find Kalen, the Viridian chief researcher, approaching with measured steps. Unlike most of his kind, Kalen made efforts to mask his instinctive reactions to humans, though Eris could still detect the subtle tension in his elongated fingers. I couldn't sleep, Eris replied with a small smile. He hoped appeared non-threatening. Thought I'd get a head start on those xenobacterial cultures. Kalen inclined his head, the cranial ridges that framed his large eyes catching the light. A commendable work ethic. May I join you? I find your analytical approaches fascinating. What Kalen really meant, Eris knew, was that he found human intuitive leaps both useful and disturbing. The Viridians, with their highly developed frontal lobes and methodical thinking patterns, often struggled with the lateral reasoning that came naturally to humans. It was one of the reasons they tolerated human presence despite their deep-seated biological aversion. Of course, Eris said, I'd welcome the company. They walked in silence for a moment before Kalen spoke again. Security Chief Rorik has requested another evaluation of human personnel protocols. Eris suppressed a sigh. Again? The last revision was only 2 months ago. He believes the current containment. Kalen paused, his skin flushing a deeper blue in what Eris recognized as embarrassment. The current safety protocols could be improved. You mean he thinks we're not being monitored closely enough? Eris didn't bother to hide the edge in his voice. What's he worried about now? That we might start howling at the artificial moon cycle. Kalen's vertical pupils contracted slightly. He is merely exercising appropriate caution. Your species has a complicated history, Dr. Thorne. You must understand that we're considered controlled predators useful for certain tasks, but fundamentally dangerous, Eris finished. I'm well aware of our reputation in the galactic community, Kalen. The Viridian made a soft clicking sound with his inner mandible, their equivalent of a conciliatory gesture. I've always found you to be a rational and valued colleague. But surely you understand that evolutionary patterns cannot be dismissed. Your species evolved as pursuit predators with highly volatile emotional states. The rest of the galaxy simply finds this concerning. Before Eris could respond, the station's communications system chimed softly. Chief Researcher Kalen and Dr. Thorne to the command center, came the announcement. Priority Alpha. They exchanged glances. Priority Alpha meant something serious had occurred, something that required both human and Viridian expertise. After you, Eris gestured, noting how Kalen subtly ensured they didn't brush against each other as they redirected their path toward the command center. The command center of Xylos Station hummed with activity when they arrived. The semicircular room was dominated by a massive hollow display currently showing a sector of space near the station's position. A cluster of Viridians stood in a tight formation around the central console, their skins cycling through anxious color patterns. At the head of the group stood Rorik, the security chief, his imposing frame made even more intimidating by the ceremonial armor that denoted his status. His skin was a rigid gray, the Viridian equivalent of battle readiness. Explain the situation, Kalen said as they approached. Rorik's gaze lingered on Eris with undisguised suspicion before he addressed Kalen. We detected unusual energy signatures at the edge of the Moro Nebula, approximately 12 light hours from our position. The patterns matched nothing in our database. He gestured to the display where a pulsing red anomaly hung in the starfield. We dispatched a probe vessel for closer investigation, he continued. It was a standard Viridian science scout with a crew of 3. They reported successful approach and began transmitting data, but then he tapped a control, and the display showed a chaotic burst of energy followed by nothing but background radiation. All contact lost. No distress signal. No debris signature large enough to account for the vessel's mass. Eris stepped closer to the display, studying the readings. You believe whatever caused those energy signatures also destroyed the scout ship? Rorik's skin flashed a warning orange. The evidence suggests an attack of unknown origin and unprecedented ferocity. We need to know what we're dealing with, Kalen said, and whether Xylos might be at risk. Our long-range communications are experiencing interference, a communications officer added. We can't establish stable contact with a Viridian homeworld or any major outposts. We're effectively isolated. Eris felt a familiar tension building in his chest, the instinctive human response to a potential threat. He was careful to control his breathing, knowing that the Viridians would detect even subtle changes in his physiological state. We should assemble a reconnaissance team, he suggested. A more substantial vessel with proper defensive capabilities. We need direct observation. Rorik's skin rippled with displeasure. I will not risk additional Viridian lives on a blind mission into unknown danger. Then I'll go, Eris said firmly. A small craft would be less detectable, and... Absolutely not. Rorik cut him off. No independent human operations are permitted under station protocol. The potential for misinterpretation of objectives is too great. Eris struggled to maintain his composure. You mean you don't trust me not to go rogue? After 5 years of service to this station. I mean, Rorik said coldly that your species lacks the disciplined response patterns necessary for methodical threat assessment. You act on instinct rather than reason. Kalen raised a hand, his skin shifting to a calming blue. This disagreement is unproductive. We must approach this systematically. I agree, Eris said, which is why I propose a joint reconnaissance. Viridian and human personnel working together, pooling our different strengths. After heated debate, a compromise was reached. A team would be assembled, 3 Viridians including Rorik, Eris as the human representative, and 2 automated defense drones. They would take the station's auxiliary research vessel, equipped with enhanced scanning capabilities and modest defensive systems. As they prepared for departure, Eris could feel the growing tension. Not just from the unknown threat lurking at the edge of the nebula, but from the fragile alliance that would need to hold if they were to survive what might await them. The auxiliary vessel detached from Xylos with a slight shudder, its engines pulsing to life as it oriented toward the coordinates of the missing scout ship. Inside the compact bridge, Eris occupied the science station while Rorik took command. Kalen, who had insisted on joining despite his research position, monitored communications. The 3rd Viridian, a security specialist named Tavik, ran continuous sensor sweeps. They traveled in uneasy silence for the first hour, each focused on their tasks. Eris studied the anomalous energy patterns, noting irregularities that suggested some form of advanced propulsion system unlike anything in the shared database. We're approaching the last known position of the scout vessel, Tavik announced, his skin a vigilant amber. Reduce speed, Rorik ordered. Activate all passive scanning systems only. No active signals. The view screen showed nothing but the wispy edges of the nebula and the distant glitter of stars, but the sensor data told a different story. Fragments of alloy, Viridian manufacturing signatures, drifted in an expanding cloud. That's definitely from the scout, Eris confirmed, examining the spectrographic analysis. But there's something else. Particles I can't identify. They appear to be some form of exotic matter, possibly weapon residue. Life signs? Kalen asked quietly. Tavik's skin darkened. None detected. Rorik's jaw tightened, the ridges above his eyes pulling together in what Eris had learned was their expression of controlled grief. Continue the search pattern. We need to determine what happened. As they proceeded deeper into the field of debris, the ship's scanners detected a larger fragment, part of the scout vessel's core structure. It tumbled slowly, its edges blackened and warped. We should retrieve that piece, Eris suggested. The damage pattern could tell us what kind of weapon was used. Rorik considered for a moment, then nodded. Prepare the retrieval drone. But at the first sign of anything unusual, we abort and withdraw. The drone was deployed, a small mechanical spider that propelled itself toward the debris. They watched in tense silence as it attached to the fragment and began to maneuver it back toward their vessel. That's when the proximity alarms blared. Multiple objects approaching. Tavik shouted, his skin flashing danger signals. High-velocity, irregular heat signatures. Evasive maneuvers. Roar commanded. Recall the drone, but it was too late. A burst of energy lanced across the space between them and the retrieval drone, vaporizing it instantly. 3 sleek, obsidian shapes streaked past their vessel, moving with impossible agility. What are those? Kalen breathed, his normally controlled demeanor slipping as his skin paled to a frightened white. Eris studied the sensor readings with growing alarm. Some kind of biomechanical constructs. Not fully organic, not fully machine. They're accelerating for another pass. The ship rocked violently as energy weapons impacted their shields. Warning lights flashed across all stations. Shields at 60%. Tavik reported. They're too fast for our targeting systems. Eris's mind raced, analyzing the attack pattern. They're hurting us, he realized suddenly. Each pass pushes us in a specific direction, away from the station and toward the nebula. Rorik shot him a skeptical glance, but the next attack came exactly as Eris had predicted, driving them further off course. There's intelligence behind this, Eris insisted. They're not just attacking randomly. They want us somewhere specific. Or they want to separate us from a station, Kalen suggested grimly. Another hit rocked the vessel, sending sparks cascading from an overhead conduit. A piece of equipment broke loose and struck Tavik, who collapsed at his station with a sharp cry of pain. Tavik is injured, Kalen reported, moving to assist. The security systems are unmonitored. I've got it, Eris said, sliding into Tavik's position. He quickly assessed the defensive capabilities. The targeting computers can't lock on these things. They move too erratically. But if I switch to manual control, human reflexes against machines? Rorik scoffed. Impossible. Not impossible, Eris countered, fingers flying across the controls. Just improbable. But right now, we don't have many options. He disengaged the automated tracking system and took direct control of the weapon array, closing his eyes briefly to center himself. When he opened them again, he was tracking the movement patterns, looking not at where the attackers were, but where they would be. The next time one of the obsidian shapes streaked toward them, Eris fired ahead of its trajectory. The energy beam connected with a satisfying flash, and the attacker spiraled off course, trailing a plume of strange, luminescent material. Direct hit, Kalen exclaimed, his skin flushing with surprised approval. Lucky shot, Rorik muttered, but there was less conviction in his voice. No, Eris said, eyes locked on the sensors, waiting for the next pass. Pattern recognition. They're fast, but predictable. They follow attack vectors that maximize efficiency while minimizing exposure. Classic predator behavior. Actually, something in his tone made Kalen glance at him sharply, but there was no time to dwell on it. The remaining attackers came around for another pass, more cautious now. They're learning, Eris warned, adjusting their approach. We need to get back to the station. We're too vulnerable out here. Rorik finally nodded agreement. Set course for Xylo's maximum thrust. The ship swung around, engines straining as they accelerated away from the nebula. For a moment, it seemed they might escape cleanly, but then the sensors blared another warning. 6 more contacts approaching from the direction of the station. Kalen reported. They've cut off our retreat. We're trapped, Rorik said, his skin a dark, resigned gray. Eris studied the tactical display, mind racing through possibilities. Not necessarily. The nebula. It contains charged gas particles that could mask our signature and disrupt their sensors. If we can reach the denser regions. The same interference would affect our navigation systems, Rorik objected. We could become hopelessly lost. Better lost than destroyed, Eris countered. And we can use stellar positioning for basic navigation once we're inside. It's our best chance. The debate was cut short by another direct hit that sent the ship spinning. Emergency systems wailed as artificial gravity fluctuated. Shields critical. Hull breach in Section 4. Kalen called out, fighting to stabilize his station as the deck lurched beneath them. The nebula, Eris insisted, looking directly at Rorik. Now! The security chief hesitated only a second longer before inputting the commands. The ship surged forward, diving toward the swirling clouds of the Moro Nebula. Behind them, the attackers gave chase, but as they penetrated the outer layers of the nebula, the sensor readings began to degrade. They're still pursuing, but they've slowed, Kalen reported. The nebula is affecting their systems as well. Eris allowed himself a moment of relief. We need to find a dense pocket where we can hide, make repairs, and assess our situation. They penetrated deeper into the nebula. The view screen now showing nothing but swirling clouds of cosmic dust illuminated by the distant fires of star formation. Eventually, they found a relatively stable region within a particulate cloud and powered down to minimal systems to avoid detection. In the sudden quiet, the reality of their situation settled over them. They were stranded, damaged, outnumbered by an unknown enemy, and cut off from the station. We need to check on Tavik, Eris said, rising from his station. They found the security specialist conscious, but in pain, a deep laceration across his chest where the equipment had struck him. The wound wasn't immediately life-threatening, but the Viridian's pale coloration indicated significant blood loss. The medical kit, Kalen said, retrieving the emergency supplies. We need to stabilize him before attempting any major repairs to the ship. Eris moved to help, kneeling beside the injured Viridian. As Kalen cleaned the wound, a distinct scent reached Eris's nostrils. The unmistakable metallic sweet smell of Viridian blood, tinged with the unique biochemical markers of their species. Something ancient and primal stirred in the deepest recesses of his brain. Kalen noticed it first, a subtle but profound change in Eris's demeanor. The human had gone perfectly still, his breathing pattern shifting to something slow and controlled. But it was the eyes that caused Kalen to freeze in place, the medical injector half raised in his hand. Eris's pupils dilated dramatically, darkening his eyes until they resembled black pools reflecting the emergency lights. His posture had altered almost imperceptibly, a slight lowering of his center of gravity, head angled forward, muscles coiled in a state of perfect readiness. Rorik, turning from the communication console, caught sight of the transformation and let out an involuntary hiss of alarm. His hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, skin blazing with warning colors. "Security breach," he barked. "The human has destabilized." The accusation snapped Eris back to full awareness. He blinked, pupils contracting, and raised his hand slowly. "I'm fine," he said carefully. "I was just processing the situation." "Your eyes," Kalen said, still frozen in place. "They changed." Eris swallowed. "It's an involuntary physiological response. Adrenaline, heightened focus. It happens in high-stress situations. It is the hunting reflex," Rorik said coldly, weapon now drawn and pointed at Eris. "The predator response to blood. The very thing all galactic protocols were designed to suppress." "I wasn't going to hurt anyone," Eris protested. "It's just a biological reaction. It doesn't control my actions." "Then why'd it trigger now?" Rorik demanded. "We've been under attack, in mortal danger for the past hour. Yet only when exposed to blood did you show your true nature." Eris struggled to find words that would make sense to them. knowing that the gulf of evolutionary history between their species had never seemed wider than in this moment. Before he could formulate a response, the ship's sensors emitted a low-frequency alert. "Movement outside the ship," Kalen said, checking the readout while maintaining his distance from Eris. "The attackers have found us." The moment of confrontation was suspended by immediate danger. Rorik kept his weapon trained on Eris for a second longer before reluctantly holstering it. "We need all hands to survive this," he said grimly. "But you will remain under observation, human." They returned to their stations, the atmosphere now charged with a new layer of tension. The tactical display showed 3 of the biomechanical constructs circling their position, moving cautiously through the nebula's charged particles. "They're searching," Eris said, forcing himself to focus on the threat rather than the mistrust now directed at him. "But they're having trouble pinpointing our exact location." "Not for long," Rorik responded. "Our repairs are incomplete, and we cannot remain powered down indefinitely. Life support is already at minimal levels." "We need a strategy," Kalen agreed, his skin displaying troubled patterns. "We cannot outrun them, and our weapons proved only marginally effective." Eris studied the sensor data, noting how the attackers moved through the nebula. "They're using some kind of quantum resonance to navigate through the interference," he observed. "See how they pause periodically? They're recalibrating." An idea began to form in his mind, a desperate plan, but perhaps their only option. "The nebula contains pockets of ionized hydrogen," he said slowly. "If we could lure them into one of those pockets and then trigger an energy cascade with a focused weapons burst, the reaction could disable or destroy them," Kalen finished, catching on to the concept. Rorik's skin flickered with skepticism. "And how do you propose we lure these things?" "We make ourselves bait," Eris said simply. "Power up just enough to be detected, head for the nearest high-density pocket, and when they follow us in, we trigger the cascade." Kalen nodded. "But the same reaction could severely damage our own vessel." "We'll need precise timing," Eris agreed. "Someone to pilot us out of the pocket the instant before detonation." Rorik's vertical pupils narrowed as he considered the plan. "It's reckless, based on instinct rather than protocol." "Sometimes instinct is all we have," Eris replied quietly. After tense discussion, they agreed there were no better options. Tavik was stabilized in a secure section of the ship, and they prepared to execute the desperate plan. Rorik would pilot, Kalen would monitor the nebula conditions, and Eris would manage the weapon systems for the critical timing of the energy burst. They powered up minimal systems and began moving toward a particularly dense hydrogen pocket approximately 2 kilometers from their position. Almost immediately, the attackers responded, converging on their location with predatory precision. "They've detected us," Kalen reported, his skin a tense blue-green. "All 3 are in pursuit, closing rapidly." "Maintain current speed," Rorik ordered. "We need them to commit fully to the chase." Eris watched the tactical display, calculating the optimal moment for detonation. The ship shuddered as it entered the hydrogen pocket, sensors registering the increasing density of charged particles surrounding them. "We're in position," he announced. "The attackers are 20 seconds from entry." Rorik's hands moved over the navigation controls with practiced efficiency. "Ready to execute maximum thrust on your mark." 15 seconds, Eris counted. 10. 5. The first of the attackers entered the hydrogen pocket, followed closely by the others. Eris waited until they were fully committed before giving the command. Now, several things happened simultaneously. Rorik engaged full thrust, the ship lurching forward with strain. Eris fired a concentrated energy burst directly into the center of the hydrogen pocket behind them. An proximity alarm blared as a 4th attacker, previously undetected, streaked in from above. "Evasive action," Kalen shouted, but it was too late. The 4th attacker collided with their vessel. Not a direct impact, but a glancing blow that sent them spiraling off course. The ship's structural integrity alarms wailed as hull plates buckled under the stress. Behind them, The energy cascade ignited the hydrogen pocket in a brilliant flash that caught the three pursuing attackers in its destructive wave. But their own vessel, thrown off its escape vector, was caught in the outer edge of the blast. Systems failed across the board. Gravity fluctuated wildly, then disappeared altogether. Emergency lighting bathed the bridge in crimson as they tumbled uncontrolled through the nebula. Stabilizers offline. Kalen called out, floating away from his console before grabbing a support beam. Main power failing. Rorik fought with the manual controls, trying to arrest their spin. Navigation and propulsion damaged. We're drifting. A terrible grinding sound echoed through the hull, followed by the high-pitched scream of escaping atmosphere. Warning indicators flashed across Eris's console. Hull breach in the rear compartment, he reported. Where Tavik is. Without hesitation, Eris pushed off from his station, propelling himself toward the exit. I'll get him. Wait. Rorik called after him, but Eris was already gone, swimming through the weightless corridor toward the injured Viridian. The situation in the rear compartment was dire. The hull breach, though small, was venting atmosphere rapidly. Emergency force fields had activated but were fluctuating due to power instability. Tavik was still secured to the medical bed, but the room's pressure was dropping dangerously. Eris made his way to the Viridian, noting with alarm that one of Tavik's wounds had reopened in the chaos. Viridian blood floated in globules through the low-gravity environment, creating a macabre constellation around them. As the distinct scent reached him again, Eris felt the change beginning. The hyper-focused state sharpening his senses, pupils dilating to capture every detail of the environment. But this time, he didn't fight it. He needed the heightened awareness, the accelerated processing of threats and solutions. He quickly assessed the situation. The breach was expanding, the force fields wouldn't hold much longer, and Tavik was losing blood rapidly. They needed to seal the breach and stabilize the Viridian before he could be moved. Eris located the emergency repair kit and moved toward the breach with fluid efficiency. Just as he reached it, the ship shuddered violently again. The fourth attacker, apparently undamaged by the hydrogen detonation, had returned. The impact sent Eris slamming against the bulkhead, the repair kit spinning away from his grasp. Worse, the force field flickered and failed, accelerating the atmosphere loss. Warning klaxons screamed throughout the vessel. In that moment, Kalen and Rorik appeared at the compartment entrance, propelling themselves forward to assist. They froze momentarily at the sight that greeted them. Eris, eyes black with dilation, moving with an unnatural precision through the chaos of the depressurizing compartment. "Get Tavik," Eris called to them, his voice deeper and more commanding than usual. "I'll seal the breach." Rorik hesitated, his instinctive fear of Eris's predator state warring with the urgent need to save his fellow Viridian. "Trust me," Eris insisted, already maneuvering toward the breach, having retrieved the repair kit with a perfectly calculated trajectory. Kalen was the first to move, pushing past his fear to reach Tavik. Rorik followed a moment later, and together they began disconnecting the injured Viridian from the medical equipment. Eris worked with machine-like precision at the hull breach, applying emergency sealant and reinforcement. His movements were economical, focused, not a single action wasted. When a piece of floating debris threatened to puncture his suit, he dodged it without even looking, as if he had sensed its approach through some primal awareness. "The attacker is coming around for another pass," Kalen called out, checking a portable scanner. "We have less than 30 seconds. "Almost done," Eris responded, applying the final seal. His voice had a strange quality to it, calm yet intense, utterly focused. "Get Tavik to the escape pod. This section won't hold against another direct hit." "Escape pod?" Roar questioned. "We're in the middle of a nebula." "It's our only chance," Eris insisted, pushing away from the now-sealed breach. "The main engines are too damaged for effective maneuvering. The pod has enough thrust to get us out of the immediate danger zone, and its smaller profile will be harder to track." Another impact rocked the ship, sending equipment tumbling through the weightless environment. A jagged piece of metal sliced across Kalen's arm, leaving a long gash that immediately began seeping viridian blood into the air. Eris turned at the scent, his already dilated pupils seeming to grow even darker. But instead of the aggression Rorik clearly expected, the security chief had half raised his weapon. Eris moved to Kalen's side with surprising gentleness. "Direct pressure," he instructed, tearing a strip of fabric from his uniform and wrapping it tightly around Kalen's injury. "We need to move. Now." They made their way to the escape pod, Eris leading the way with Kalen supporting Tavik while Rorik covered their rear. The pod was designed for emergency evacuations, cramped but functional, with basic life support and limited propulsion. As they secured Tavik inside, the ship shuddered again, more violently this time. Warning lights bathed the corridor in pulsing red. "Structural integrity failing," a computerized voice announced. "Catastrophic hull breach imminent." They scrambled into the pod, Rorik taking the pilot's position while Eris helped secure Kalen and Tavik. The space was tight, forcing them into uncomfortable proximity, particularly uncomfortable for the Viridians, who found themselves pressed against a human in full predator mode. "Launch sequence initiated," Rorik announced, fingers dancing across the controls. "Brace for separation." The escape pod detached with a jarring thud, small thrusters firing to push them away from the dying research vessel. Through the small viewport, they watched as their ship listed in the nebula's swirling clouds, internal explosions visible through the growing hull breaches. "The attacker is still out there," Kalen said quietly, checking the pod's limited sensor array. "It will find us soon." "We need to go deeper into the nebula," Eris suggested, his voice still carrying that strange, focused quality. "Find the densest areas where its sensors will be most impaired." Rorik's skin displayed skepticism, but he adjusted their course accordingly. "And then what?" "We have limited air, limited power, and no way to contact the station." "One problem at a time," Eris replied. He turned his attention to Tavik, checking the Viridian's vital signs with methodical care. "His condition is stabilizing, but he's lost a significant amount of blood." In the close confines of the pod, the scent of Viridian blood remained strong, but Eris seemed to have achieved some measure of control over his physiological response. His pupils remained dilated, but his movements were deliberate and controlled. Kalen watched him with a mixture of scientific curiosity and lingering fear. "You're still in that state," he observed. "The predator focus." Eris nodded without looking up from Tavik. "It's a survival mechanism. Heightened awareness, accelerated cognitive processing, enhanced sensory perception. Evolved for hunting," Rorik interrupted coldly. "For killing." "For survival," Eris corrected, finally looking up to meet the security chief's suspicious gaze. "Which is something we all need right now." "Is that why your eyes change?" Kalen asked, professional curiosity temporarily overriding caution. "The pupil dilation?" "Maximum light gathering," Eris explained. "Originally evolved for low-light hunting, but now it happens in any situation requiring hyperfocus. The smell of blood is one trigger. It signals danger, injury, the need for immediate action. Yet you claim it doesn't make you dangerous," Rorik said skeptically. Eris held his gaze steadily. "The capacity for violence and the choice to commit it are different things, Rorik. Yes, humans evolved as predators. Yes, we have instincts and biological responses that reflect that evolutionary history. But we also evolved complex moral reasoning and social cooperation. What matters isn't the instinct, but the choice made in response to it." Before Rorik could reply, the pod sensors emitted a soft warning tone. "It's found us," Kalen reported grimly. They fell silent, watching the sensor display as the biomechanical attacker approached their position. The pod had no weapons, minimal shielding, and nowhere to hide in the open nebula. "It's scanning us," Rorik said, studying the readouts. "Unusual pattern. Almost like it's confused." Eris leaned forward, examining the data. "It's not attacking immediately like before. It's circling, assessing. Perhaps it doesn't recognize the escape pod as the same threat as the research vessel," Kalen suggested. "Or," Eris's eyes narrowed in thought. What if it's not actually hunting us specifically? What if it was hunting our ship because of something the ship had, something we collected or detected? The fragment from the scout vessel, Kalen realized. The piece we were retrieving when they first attacked. We don't have that fragment now, Rorik pointed out. It was lost with the ship. But the attacker doesn't know that, Eris said, an idea forming. It's scanning us to determine if we still have whatever it wants. How does this help us? Rorik demanded. If we can convince it we don't have what it's looking for, it might lose interest, Eris explained. Or at least delay long enough for us to figure out a better plan. He moved to the pod's small engineering station, examining the systems available. The pod has a waste disposal mechanism that ejects material at high velocity. If we jettison something with a similar mass and composition to the fragment we retrieved. A decoy, Kalen nodded, catching on. It might pursue that instead of us. They quickly assembled a bundle of spare parts and non-essential equipment that roughly matched the mass and material composition of the scout vessel fragment. Eris programmed the ejection to send it on a trajectory away from both their position and the direction of Xylo's station. Ready, he announced. Ejecting now. The pod shuddered slightly as the improvised decoy was jettisoned into the nebula. On the sensors, they watched as the attacker immediately altered course to investigate the new object. It worked, Kalen breathed, his skin shifting to a relieved blue. Temporarily, Rorik cautioned. Once it determines the decoy isn't what it seeks, it will return. Then we need to use this time to move away from this position, Eris said. And I suggest we head back toward Xylos. The station needs to be warned about these things. Agreed, Rorik said, surprising them both with his concurrence. Setting course for Xylos station. Minimal power to avoid detection. As they began their cautious journey back through the nebula, the tension in the cramped pod gradually shifted. The immediate threat had passed, but a more fundamental confrontation remained unresolved. I need to understand, Kalen said finally, breaking the silence. When you entered that state, when your pupils dilated at the scent of blood, why did you use it to help us rather than harm us? Everything in Viridian evolutionary memory warns us that a predator focused on blood means imminent death. Eris considered the question carefully. His pupils had begun to return to normal size as the immediate danger receded, but he remained in a heightened state of awareness. Because the state itself is neutral, he explained. It's just a physiological mechanism for focusing all resources on survival. What matters is the intention behind it. He paused, searching for words that might bridge the evolutionary gulf between them. Think of it as a tool. A knife can be used to attack or to perform surgery. The knife itself isn't good or evil, but your ancestors used this state to hunt and kill. Rorik interjected, still wary. Yes, Eris acknowledged, and also to protect their family groups from threats, to rescue injured companions, to solve complex environmental problems. The predator adaptation gave humans advantages beyond just hunting. Kalen's skin rippled with thoughtful patterns. Our species evolved from herd-prey animals. When a predator's eyes fixed on one of us with that focused intensity, it meant only one thing. Death was imminent. The instinct to freeze in terror is written into our genetic memory. And that's why the sight of my dilated pupils triggered such a strong fear response, Eris nodded. I understand. To you, it's a primal danger signal. The most dangerous signal possible, Rorik said quietly. There is nothing in Viridian experience more terrifying than being the focus of a predator's attention when blood is present. It's why galactic protocols around humans are so strict. A somber silence fell over the pod as each contemplated the vast evolutionary histories that had shaped their instinctive responses to each other. The sensor console beeped softly, indicating they were approaching the outer boundary of the nebula. We'll need to be careful once we leave the nebula's interference, Eris noted, checking the readings. If any of those attackers are patrolling the area, we have minimal shielding and no weapons, Rorik agreed. Our only advantage is our small size and potentially being overlooked. As they reached the nebula's edge, Kalen adjusted the sensors to maximum sensitivity. I'm detecting multiple signatures in the space between us and Xylo's station. Some match the biomechanical attackers, but others are Viridian vessels. Rorik finished, studying the display. Reinforcement from the homeworld must have responded to our distress signals before communications were completely severed. They're engaged in combat with the attackers, Eris observed. And it looks like they're holding their own, but the battle is blocking our direct path to the station. We'll need to find an alternative approach, Rorik decided. Perhaps using the outer asteroid field as cover. As he adjusted their course, Tavik stirred, regaining consciousness for the first time since they'd abandoned the research vessel. The injured Viridian's eyes fluttered open, immediately widening in alarm at their cramped surroundings. Easy, Eris cautioned, moving to check his vital signs. You're safe. We're in an escape pod heading back to Xylos. Tavik's skin flickered weakly with confusion, then memory returned. The attackers, the ship, destroyed, Kalen informed him gently. But we survived thanks to quick action. Tavik's gaze settled on Eris, and a visible shudder passed through his weakened frame. I remember. Your eyes. Well, my blood. His voice faltered. Dr. Thorne's predator state was activated, Kalen explained with surprising neutrality. But he directed it toward our protection, not aggression. Tavik looked unconvinced, his skin displaying the muted colors of fear and confusion. Eris stepped back, giving the injured Viridian space. We're approaching the asteroid field, Rorik announced. Prepare for turbulence. Our navigational systems aren't designed for this kind of precision maneuvering. The pod shuddered as they entered the field, dense clusters of rocks ranging from car-sized to mountain-sized tumbling through the void. Rorik guided them carefully, but the pod's limited thrusters struggled with the necessary adjustments. We're receiving a transmission, Kalen said suddenly. From Xylo's station. He activated the communication system, and a familiar voice filled the pod. Unidentified vessel. This is Xylo's station. You are entering a secure perimeter during an active threat situation. Identify yourself immediately. This is Security Chief Rorik, Rorik responded. Escape Pod Alpha 7 from Research Vessel Thelios. We have 4 survivors aboard requesting emergency retrieval and medical assistance. A pause, then, confirmed, Chief Rorik. Dispatching a security shuttle to your coordinates. Maintain position and prepare for docking. Relief washed over the cramped pod, though Eris noted that their troubles were far from over. The immediate threat to their lives might be passing, but the more complex challenge of what had been revealed during their ordeal remained. Soon a sleek Viridian security shuttle appeared among the asteroids, expertly maneuvering to their position. Magnetic clamps engaged with a solid thunk, and pressurized seals extended to create a safe transfer corridor. The shuttle crew, fully armed Viridian security personnel, reacted visibly when they saw Eris, subtle shifts in posture, hands tightening on weapons. Word of what had happened had clearly spread. Tavik was transferred first, rushed to the shuttles. Medical bay. Kalen followed, his arm now properly treated but still causing him pain. Rorik conferred briefly with the shuttle commander before boarding. Eris was the last to leave the pod, conscious of the wary gazes following his every movement. As he stepped into the shuttle, he found himself surrounded by armed guards. Dr. Thorne, the shuttle commander, said stiffly, "By order of Station Command, you are to be isolated in secure quarters until a full evaluation can be conducted." Eris looked past him to where Rorik stood. "Is this necessary?" "Protocol," Rorik replied simply, though something in his tone suggested reluctance rather than vindication. Eris nodded and allowed himself to be escorted to a small, secure compartment at the rear of the shuttle. As the door sealed behind him, he sank onto the narrow bench and closed his eyes, exhaustion finally catching up to him. The journey back to Xylo's station passed in tense silence. When they finally docked, Eris was kept separate from the others, escorted by a full security detail through corridors that had been cleared of personnel. The station was on high alert, with defense systems fully activated and security checkpoints established at key junctions. Instead of being taken to the medical bay for evaluation like the others, Eris was brought directly to a secure room adjacent to the command center. Not quite a cell, but certainly not his regular quarters. The door locked behind him with a definitive click. Hours passed with no communication. Eris used the time to rest, knowing that whatever came next would require all his mental faculties. Eventually, the door opened to admit Kalen, now wearing a fresh uniform with his injured arm properly bandaged. "How are you feeling?" Eris asked, rising to his feet. "Functional," Kalen replied, his skin displaying cautious neutral tones. "Tavik will recover as well. And the station? The attackers?" "The Viridian fleet has driven them back for now, though we still don't know their origin or true purpose." Kalen paused. "But that's not why I'm here." "I assume not," Eris said with a wry smile. "Station command is divided on how to proceed regarding your situation," Kalen explained. "Some advocate for immediate removal from the station and permanent restrictions on human involvement in joint operations." "And you? What do you advocate?" Kalen's skin rippled with complex patterns that Eris couldn't fully interpret. "I am here to understand before making any recommendation." "So this is my hearing," Eris nodded. "Unofficial, but consequential." "If you prefer," Kalen acknowledged. "What happened on that ship, when your pupils dilated, when you entered that state, it challenges fundamental assumptions about human biological responses that underpin our entire security protocol system." "Because I didn't become aggressive when exposed to blood," Eris said. "Precisely. For centuries, the galactic community has operated on the understanding that human predator responses, particularly the blood scent reaction, represented an uncontrollable regression to violent instincts. It's why humans are required to undergo biochemical dampening treatments before serving on mixed-species stations." Eris frowned. "I've never undergone such treatments." "No," Kalen confirmed, "because this was an experimental program, a controlled environment to observe whether selected humans could function safely without chemical suppression. You were chosen because your psychological profile showed exceptional impulse control." The revelation didn't entirely surprise Eris, though the extent of the monitoring was greater than he'd suspected. "And now your experiment has yielded unexpected results," he observed. "Indeed." Kalen's skin shifted to a scholarly blue. "Instead of confirming our theories about human predator states, you've completely contradicted them. The blood scent trigger activated your heightened focus, but you directed that focus toward protection and problem-solving, not aggression. Because that's what the state is actually for," Eris explained. "It's not a bloodlust trigger. It's a survival optimization response that can be directed by conscious intention." Kalen paced slowly across the room, his movements betraying deep thought. "If this is true for humans generally, not just for you specifically, it would require a fundamental reassessment of interspecies protocols. A reassessment that some would strongly resist," Eris noted. "Yes, Rourke among them, though." Kalen hesitated. "He has been unusually reflective since our return. Your actions, saving Tavik, made an impression. And you? What impression did my black-eyed predator state make on you, Kalen?" The Viridian stopped pacing, turning to face Eris directly. "Terror," he admitted simply. "Primal, instinctive terror, unlike anything I had experienced before. When your pupils dilated at the scent of Tavik's blood, every cell in my body screamed. Danger." He paused. "And yet, you acted to protect." This contradiction has occupied my thoughts continuously. "Evolution shapes our instincts," Eris said quietly. "But consciousness shapes our choices." A soft chime interrupted them, and the door slid open to reveal Rorik. The security chief entered with formal rigidity, his skin a controlled gray that revealed nothing of his thoughts. "The command council will see you now," he announced. Eris was escorted to the main conference chamber, where the senior leadership of Xylo's station had assembled. Viridians of various departments sat in a semicircle, their skin displaying a spectrum of emotional states from curiosity to apprehension. At the center sat the station director, an elder Viridian whose pale blue skin bore the distinctive ridges of great age and authority. "Dr. Eris Thorne," the director began, "you stand before this council at a moment of significant uncertainty. The recent attack on our station by unknown entities is itself cause for concern. But equally pressing is the matter of what transpired during the crisis regarding your biological responses." Eris straightened his shoulders. "I understand, Director. Security Chief Rorik and Chief Researcher Kalen have provided detailed accounts of the events aboard the research vessel and subsequent escape pod. These accounts describe a human predator state response that defies our established understanding." The director's ancient eyes fixed on Eris. "We would hear your perspective." For the next hour, Eris explained in careful detail the nature of the human hyperfocus state, its evolutionary origins, its triggers, its purpose, and most importantly, its relationship to conscious choice. He described how the dilation of pupils was not a sign of bloodlust, but of maximum sensory intake, how the enhanced focus could be directed toward any survival-critical task, including protection and problem-solving. When he finished, the chamber remained silent for several long moments before the director spoke again. "What you describe contradicts centuries of interspecies understanding about human biology." "With respect, Director," Eris replied, "that understanding was formed without sufficient input from humans themselves, often based on observations of humans in extreme situations without context for their actions." "A convenient explanation," one counselor interjected skeptically. "But potentially accurate," Kalen countered, his skin displaying the formal patterns of scientific testimony. "My observations support Dr. Thorne's assertions. Despite exhibiting the physical markers we have long associated with predatory aggression, his actions were consistently protective and rational. One anomalous human doesn't change biological reality," another counselor argued. "Perhaps not," Rorik said unexpectedly, rising from his seat. His skin still maintained its guarded gray, but his voice carried new conviction. "But it should cause us to question our assumptions." All eyes turned to the security chief in surprise. "I have spent my career enforcing protocols based on the belief that human predator states represent an uncontrollable danger," Rorik continued. "I believed this without question until I witnessed Dr. Thorne's actions firsthand. When faced with Tavik's blood, when his eyes showed the predator focus we have all been taught to fear, he did not attack. He protected. He problem-solved. He saved lives, including my own." The council chamber filled with the soft clicking sounds of Viridian discussion. Eris remained silent, understanding that this moment represented a potential turning point in human-Viridian relations. Finally, the director raised a hand for silence. "What would you have us do, Dr. Thorne? Dismiss generations of caution based on one incident?" "No," Eris said firmly. "I would ask you to investigate further, to study human biological responses with an open mind rather than predetermined conclusions, to work with humans as partners in understanding, not subjects to be controlled based on fear." The director's skin shifted through thoughtful hues before settling on a decisive blue. "The council will deliberate on these matters. In the meantime, you will remain on restricted duty, but no longer in isolation. Chief Researcher Kalen will establish a formal study protocol to further examine these questions under controlled conditions." It wasn't complete vindication, but it was a beginning. As the council adjourned, Eris found himself approached by both Kalen and Rorik in the corridor outside. "That went better than might have been expected," Kalen observed, his skin now a more relaxed turquoise. "Indeed," Eris agreed, "though I suspect the debate is far from over." Rorik stood slightly apart, his posture still formal but less rigid than before. "I have requested to participate in Kalen's study protocol," he said stiffly. "As security chief, I should understand the reality of what we're dealing with, not just the traditional assumptions." Eris recognized the significant concession this represented. "I would welcome your involvement, Rorik." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken acknowledgments of how fundamentally their relationship had changed. It was Kalen who finally broke it with a question that cut to the heart of the matter. "When you look at us, Eris, When your eyes focus on us with that intensity, what do you actually see? What does a human predator truly perceive when looking at a viridian? Eris considered the question carefully, understanding its importance. I see sentient beings with their own evolutionary history, their own strengths and vulnerabilities. Different from me, yes, but not prey, not enemies. Colleagues, sometimes friends. He smiled slightly. Even when they're frustrating or frightening or don't understand me. And when the blood scent triggers your focus? Rorik pressed, still needing reassurance. I see problems that need solving, threats that need assessing, people who need protecting. Eris met the security chief's gaze directly. The focus sharpens my perception, but my values determine what I do with that perception. Rorik's vertical pupils widened slightly, the closest expression to understanding his species could display. Perhaps there is much we have misunderstood about humans. And perhaps, Eris acknowledged, there is much we have failed to explain properly about ourselves. As they walked together toward the laboratory where Kalen's new study would be conducted, Eris reflected that true understanding between species with such different evolutionary histories would never be simple or complete. The Viridians would likely always feel an instinctive unease at the sight of dilated human pupils. Humans would likely always feel frustrated by being viewed as potentially dangerous. But awareness of these instinctive responses was the first step toward moving beyond them, toward relationships based on knowledge rather than fear, on choices rather than biological determinism. In the end, what mattered wasn't the predator focus itself, but what one chose to do with it. To protect rather than harm, to solve rather than destroy. The eyes might dilate at the smell of blood, but the mind would determine what happened next. And in that choice lay the true measure of any sentient being, human or otherwise.